Welcome back to the David Kurten Show here on today's News Talk TNT. It is so fantastic to have in the studio now David Clews. Welcome to the show, David.
Well, thank you very much for having me on, David. How are you?
I'm really, really good. Thanks, David. Look, you normally interview me. You don't probably need any introduction to our listeners because you are the founder and the CEO and the emperor of Unity
Respect.
News
All of
Network.
the
So,
above.
indeed, and it's really good to have you on my show for a change. We turn the tables around, but we tend to agree on almost everything. And over the last 4 years, it's pretty much the fourth anniversary this weekend of the implementation of lockdown. And it's been one of the things that's been very disappointing to me over the last 4 years is people that I stood with to fight to come out of the EU, to fight against wokery, have systematically gone off and turned against people like you and me on lockdown and on injections and then on Ukraine and then on the whole Gaza situation. I mean, have you noticed that too?
Yes. I mean, I think in many ways you could argue it's been a great divider, and maybe these people
Mm,
weren't as switched on as they claim to be. But I think again, you're right that once the going's got a wee bit tougher, many people have just gone by the wayside. And I think Brexit was much more simple. You would either remain or
mm,
leave. Whereas with the subsequent things that have happened, there's a great deal of intricacies to them.
mm,
But it's for me, and I think you're the same as well. Once you have the mindset that everything the regime does is bad, therefore the
mm,
only logical conclusion is to be opposed to it. Like even if they're doing something that you like, I'll give you a good example today. And the BBC are running the headline: Keir Starmer comes out against Nike changing the England flag. Now,
mm,
that's just because your average reader will be like, oh, well, okay, maybe he's not that bad, Starmer. It's just a
mm.
psyop. Like, he doesn't care about that. And this is what they do. They're very duplicitous.
Yeah, indeed. One of the most disturbing things recently has been how there's been quite a big split in the right about Israel and Gaza. And I've lost a lot of support from people who say, oh, I agree with you on absolutely everything you say, but you're not 100% pro-Israel. You're calling for a ceasefire. But to my mind, I don't know how anyone who has any humanity cannot call for a ceasefire in Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really get it either. I mean, you're basically witnessing people being massacred with fighter jets and the
Mm,
most modern advanced missiles that anyone's ever witnessed. I think it's people don't see the bigger picture on the
mm,
Israel-Gaza conflict. They don't understand the influence Israel has in Western countries. They look at the problems that they have with Islam in the West,
mm,
and Israel have done a very good job at saying, well, no, this is we're fighting here, so you don't have to fight over there. People have just they've just been too bamboozled.
mm,
Whereas your listeners, anybody that looks in this a wee bit deeply knows that this isn't black and white. There's a lot of nuances to this conflict.
mm.
It's been ongoing since 1948. It hasn't just happened
Yeah.
overnight. Netanyahu supported Hamas. They funded them militarily on October the 7th. There was clearly a stand down order to allow this to happen. You've
Mm,
now got Jared Kushner talking about building nice waterfront property on
mhm.
on Gaza. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it is an eye opener, and I think again, I think a lot of people in this country are just angry about what's happened here, and they kind of
Mm,
see Israel not taking any prisoners, and part of them's like, well, I wish we could be like that.
mm. Yeah, but you also have people who I've stood with before who say they're for free speech, who are now agitating against free speech, who are calling rallies on the streets hate marches. People like Douglas Murray, even Suella Braverman, calling the ceasefire marches hate marches. Why do you think that they're doing this?
Well, I think a lot of these people, well, Suella Braverman's husband is Jewish with family in the IDF,
Yeah,
so that I mean there is that side of things, and yeah, I mean, it's a very, very good point, and it's so frustrating because what they've now gone and done is they've used the rhetoric around these marches to attack other people. And look, right now, I mean, last week Rishi Sunak came out and talked about these extremist groups, and there was a few Muslim ones, and the British National Socialist Movement, who I'd never even heard of, and then Patriotic Alternative. And what'll end up happening is they'll be banned, right? And then they'll go further down. Then it'll be, well, who's next? Right? Well, it's the Heritage Party. It's UNN. It's TNT Radio. And this is what people don't realize, is that when they bring in a censorship regime, it has to have new victims constantly. And it was the same on Twitter when they started banning people. They said, well, we're going to get rid of the most extreme people. And then eventually it's like old ladies criticizing trans ideology. Yeah. It's so disappointing the way people have behaved over this. The pro-Palestine ceasefire marches have been overwhelmingly peaceful. They've been respectful. They've been there's people exercising their democratic right to freedom of speech. And again, I think what has annoyed a lot of people, David, is that there's a lot of foreigners on these marches, and their unhappiness with what's happened to the UK is being exploited. And again, they don't realize, well, it's actually going to be used against you because the government hates you more than they hate these because that's where they worry, is a genuine grassroots populist movement with real conservative values. I think that's what they fear the most.
Yeah, that's why they conflated Islamist extremism, which I don't agree with the term extremism as having any meaning whatsoever, but they conflated them with the far right, when the far right have got whatever that is. It doesn't even exist really in this country, but they conflate the two things together with what's going on in the marches on the street. But you know, the people who've done this, who've gone there and tried to smear these marches, are, to me, an exact mirror of the far left cultural Marxists, because they're saying, okay, well, we need to deal with anti-Semitism, which exactly mirrors the way the left says, oh, we need to deal with all these made up concepts like homophobia, transphobia, and Islamophobia. And like you say, this is going to come back on them, because if they get something banned, if they get a new law made, they're going to be banned themselves as well. And
100%. 100. I mean, it's so frustrating as these all the people that were screaming anti-Semitism are now being censored themselves because they are Islamophobic. It's ridiculous. And again, what I think, like, here's where I would say is crossing a line. If you went out and say you saw a Jewish person or a Muslim and you went up and started abusing them and attacking them simply because of who they were, I think most people would say, well, that's not really cricket. That's not how you behave in a civilized society. But talking about group behavior, talking about Jewish people as a collective, how they overall behave, talking about Muslims as a collective, how they overall behave, that's just what you do. Like, people can say anything they like about white people. They can talk about that. There's no problems. Or it's people are allowed to talk about how groups of people behave or how nations behave. Yet there's the double standards and the utter hypocrisy of it. And yeah, I mean, I am now of the opinion all these words are rooted. I mean, anti-Semitism even is rooted in cultural Marxism, Islamophobia, all these phobias. You're talking about things. and they immediately label it hate. And as soon as it's labeled hate, you're no longer allowed to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely right. It is a cultural Marxist oppressor victim narrative. And it says, okay, in this, Islamophobia means Muslims are victims, anti-Semitism means Jews are victims, homophobia means gay people are victims. And then they have the right to police the speech of anybody else, not just on an individual basis, but on what someone says, maybe, about Israel or about Islam. So there's no real difference. But
and see, the point I always make is the point I always make as well, David, is that of course free speech has consequences. If I walk into a pub and start shouting things or saying things, there's a risk people might not want to be my friend. But My
Mm,
argument really is very simple. The state should not police speech. The state
mm,
should not police thinking. There have always been laws in place to deal with breaches of the peace or attacking people. But now,
mm,
because when the state brings that in, you're terrified of talking. I mean, look at all this stuff, David, with the Reform Party and
mm,
what's happening to these three candidates who have really said nothing that is wrong or nothing that is even
mm,
remote, in my opinion, remotely controversial. Hope Not Hate's done the hit piece. Richard Tice, who I'm not a fan of, and I know
mm,
you've got your concerns, has just immediately buckled on that, and now
mm.
you're going to dance to the tune of these basically communists.
Right. Well, if you're worried about what Hope Not Hate say, you're not going to have anybody unless they approve them, which is like, well, there's not much point in standing to change something. You're not going to reform anything if you're going to be, your reform is going to be policed by Hope Not Hate. I mean, that's ridiculous, isn't it? But we are both in Hope Not Hate's State of Hate report
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
2024. I think that's utterly hilarious. I mean, why have they put you in there? I mean, I
Oh,
mean, it's ridiculous.
I'm a far right conspiracy theorist who talks about, things that shouldn't be talked about, and it is fundamental. Hope not like in this country we don't have a Stasi
Mm,
or a KGB directly monitoring citizens. So what the government does is they outsource this work to Hope Not Hate. Hope Not
mm,
Hate keeps these lists. So the government can turn around and say, well, we're a free society. We believe in free speech. But actually, they get organizations to do it on their behalf. So Hope Not Hate compile this as an active list of dissidents, people
mm,
who pose a threat to the regime. So whilst we might laugh at it, and it is ridiculous, they see us and everyone on that as a threat. And it
mm,
does tend to be people who approach things from what you would consider a right wing. And like we pointed this out as well. Like the government talked about violent groups. Antifa, these are people that
mm,
go out, they wear balaclavas, they take knives, they take baseball bats, and the government never declared them an extremist organization.
mm.
Now, I wouldn't, I don't know. I mean, as much as again, that's not really free speech. That's going out menacing people with weapons. If I went
Mm,
out in my local street with weapons menacing people, I'd get arrested. So they don't do it with Antifa.
mm. You get taken in straight away, wouldn't you? Because you're on the list, and like you say, on one level it's comical, but on another it is quite concerning that I'm on there, you're on there. I mean, I look through it, and the half of the people there, I think, oh, they're my friends. It's like, well, we're all in this pamphlet together of dissidents that are people of concern of the state, but there are people in that list who are absolutely, off the edge, really are, proper neo-Nazis, and I've got nothing to do with them whatsoever. But on the other hand, there are people there that I would consider myself cultural Marxists of some,
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
some
But
degree,
it's interesting as
radical
well. Like
feminists.
the thing about like when they talk about the neo-Nazi threat, it's such a small amount of, I mean, it's like basically a handful of people. Because you and I
Mm,
know most of the people in the sort of dissident circles. It's such a tiny
mm,
amount of people. And it is no threat to the regime. And again, if you look at the vast majority of these more extreme movements, you could argue most of them are actually involved with operatives of the government. That's what happens in
mm,
America extensively. All these sort of militias, all these groups,
mm,
the vast majority of the people are working for the FBI. So that's the same here as well. And the most extremist group and organization in this country is the regime that runs it.
mm,
And I know you kind of feel similar, and I nearly all of the threats we face comes from them. It's not organic, it's not homegrown, it's them,
mm.
and people need to waken up to that very, very quickly. And that's why you shouldn't give them the power. All these people calling for pro-Palestine marches to be banned, for speech to be policed, you're empowering them. They will then use that to attack you.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got to be very, very careful about allowing them to expand the definitions of hate and extremism. I would take them out of law completely. I've said that many times because they're subjective,
Yep.
and one person's extremist is another person's freedom fighter. One person's hate speech is another person's banter. And you're going to ban all of these things. The law should be objective. It should be incitement to violence, incitement to crime, abuse, and harassment. They are objective, and they should be, arrestable and punishable, but not what someone subjectively feels makes them uncomfortable. And on the 4th anniversary of lockdown, we can look back and see over the last 4 years, this government has been absolutely tyrannical to the point where they would be classed as extremists themselves if they were subject
100%.
to their own definition.
They're the ones pushing for war. They're the ones pushing for conflict with Russia.
Yeah.
They're advocating World War III. I mean, hello,
Yes,
this is
right.
destruction of mankind. I don't think you can get much more extreme in terms of violence than that. But they're allowed to say that. They're allowed. Whereas if we were to say, well, look, these people who are Zionists have a lot of influence on British politics. Oh, but no, you can't say that. But I can say we need to get ready to conscript people to go and fight Putin and die on battlefields. All right, sounds fair to me.
Absolutely. Look, they are full of hate in a way for Russia, but through what they are saying. Liz Truss saying, "I want to cripple Russia's economy," for example, and the extremism of locking people down and kicking people out of a job because they don't have an experimental injection. So we've seen, the regime be full of hate and extremism, and we need to stand up to them. And what I would say to everyone watching is try to get involved in politics and kick these people out of the ballot box and put people in like David, like I, like Eloise, who are on the side of the people and on the side of freedom. David, thank you so much for joining me on today's News Talk, TNT.